are looking at second nature sustainable thinking. And we're delighted to have JP Cerda and Helen Dewhurst joining us both this morning. So thank you both for joining. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, pleasure to be here.
So just to give a little introduction to their backgrounds, JP has experience in companies like BP, Shell, and he founded and exited a successful company called Almac Energy, which was focused on advising large corporates on their strategy for 100% renewable energy. During this time, he noticed that there was a gap in the market to apply smart technology to simplify the process, which is why he founded Zeigo, a tech platform that makes the process of contracting energy directly from wind and solar farms simple, efficient, and cost-effective. So JP is going to be sharing his experience and knowledge in that area. Helen is a corporate sustainability associate at BloombergNEF, and she is focused on efforts by large companies to reduce emissions and increase purchasing of renewable energy. She examines the fundamentals of power markets and how energy policies and renewable energy economies interact to affect corporate renewable purchasing decisions. And she previously was working in sustainable procurement at Accenture. So thank you both for joining us this morning. I'm really excited for this conversation as we look today at sustainable thinking. And while we are discussing, if anyone listening has any questions, we would love for you to share those questions with us. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if anyone says at any point sparks any questions, or you'd like to challenge what we're saying, please do put that question in the Q&A box, and we'll come on to that at the end of the session. So to begin with, the first thing, I guess, to get us started, sustainability is such a large issue. Why isn't it already second nature for companies to think about? Helen, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that often gets me thinking as well. It seems very obvious from where I'm sitting. Why wouldn't you do this? It often saves money, it's good for your reputation, and for example, with things like energy, it can lead to business advantages like security of supply in places where it can be difficult to connect to the grid. So there's a lot of obvious benefits, but I think the trouble is there's two types of businesses, and the first is a business who, this is their bread and butter. They make, for example, electric cars, or they make bioplastics, and or they're a recycling company. You know, their products, all their services are inherently green. The other type of company is the consumer goods companies and the mining companies, who this is very secondary to their core aim to make profit and to make a very specific set of products, and so this has not come naturally to them. It's not in their original business remit, and they have to make a special effort to think about how they're going to do things differently, and I think that's where the challenge comes in, because if they haven't really taken the time to think about benefits, then actually it's not part of their day-to-day, and they need to employ different teams and new resources to sort of get over the initial barrier of starting to think about this and do things differently.
JP, do you have thoughts on that?
Yes, so it's a very complicated subject. I mean, each company is completely different, and some of them are very strongly focused on impact, and I think impact is the most important word here. So basically, what impact the product or the service has across the chain. Others just basically focus on their core company and don't really look at their supply chain. So it's a very, very broad subject amongst different companies, but it's definitely depending on the company. So I'm sure that if there was some sort of standard that most companies could adhere to, would be a lot a lot easier. Like for example, now some companies adhere or are part of the science-based targets. Others opt to join the RE100, for example, but that's optional. So each company has their own targets and whatever, and it seems to be the really large companies that currently are doing stuff, but actually bragging about it as well, because they have that power to do so. So it's difficult for smaller companies to actually know where to start as well. So there's no clear guide for companies.
Yeah, I really agree on that point as well. I think size matters, because it's almost like, can you cash in on credit and get credit for this? And depending on where your sustainability team sits, it might be a marketing tool, and so some smaller companies might not have the bandwidth to do this in the first place, and so that's a challenge.
Yeah, and some companies don't have the sophisticated analyst team to understand cost impact of their product, and versus, like, but for example, if you are seen to be greener, what impact that's going to have on the sale of your product versus not. For example, in my previous company, Amac, we ran a study for Virgin Media, because they were not seen to be green at all. I don't really think they are yet, but at the time it was basically they dedicated a lot of effort and people towards analyzing the impact that being seen as a green company was going to have in switching your broadband supplier, and are they going to get more clients, are they not going to get more clients, is going to have an impact, versus others that do seem a bit more green and whatever. So it's a big analysis. You need resources, you need teams dedicated to this, and a lot of companies don't really have this.
I guess my follow-on question from that is, we see, like you've both mentioned, there are many companies that are doing things in this area, and what the incentive behind that is often, like you say, to appeal more to the consumer. Are we, for those initiatives, are we seeing them actually have any impact? I think lots of companies really talk a lot about their CSR policy, and that is a big bonus for consumers buying into that. But are those initiatives actually doing anything, or is it, like you say, just a marketing strategy?
I mean, you have to be very, very careful. There's a lot of greenwash around, and if tweaking a comment will mean that they tick their environmental box, I mean, it's very easy for some companies to just jump on that wagon and say, oh yeah, but this part of the trainer is recyclable, so it's a sustainable trainer. And we're very green, and you can put stuff in the box saying the box is 100% recyclable and whatever, and like, we care about the environment, whatever. But you have to be very, very careful on like every single aspect of it, like the manufacturing process and the impact on the other materials and the rest of the supply chain, and how they treat their staff, how they treat their where do they manufacture, if it's in Brazil, if it's in whatever, how they do it. So it's a very complicated process. I mean, like, my focus is energy, and a lot of companies are looking at scope 3 emissions and their supply chain, and how they can basically help their supply chain manufacture their goods in a more sustainable way, and using energy across the and that itself is a very complicated thing, because some will be keen for the idea, others won't, and how can you enforce that to your supply chain? I'm not entirely sure.
I guess it comes back to what you were saying about there needs to be a standard people for companies to know what to do and actually get started on it, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
Helen, from your perspective of from what you do, you're kind of focused in the energy and the tracking carbon targets. I mean, what's your perspective on the success that you're seeing? Am I being too pessimistic?
No, I think it's really good. It's important to hold these companies to account, and when they do make a claim, as JP says, we're making recyclable products. It's important to look in the detail behind that, and I think what's really revealing to me is where a sustainability team sits within a company. Firstly, do they have one? Which, to be fair, smaller companies might not have the resource to do. But then, for a larger company, really, you should expect that they're producing a sustainability report, they're tracking key metrics, and they're making progress on these each year. And they have some sort of target that they're working towards on all the key areas like carbon, water, treatment of workers, etc. And actually, it's not that difficult to do. There's loads of frameworks out there. There's loads of good practice guidance that's freely available. It's also not rocket science to do things like work out how you could procure renewable energy. I mean, it's everywhere now. If you really want to buy it as a business, you can. And so, yeah, I think it is important to approach with skepticism and to really question what the actions are, and also how tough it was a decision to make promises and to hold and to keep them. So, for example, something that I quite commonly discuss with companies who are trying to do the right thing, but then not sort of change too much and maybe not adjust their budget and how they spend their money on and also their business model, how much time and effort do they actually have to put into this to make a change. And it's, for example, setting a science-based target. Can they set a target that follows the trajectory that they were going to go, the direction they were going to go in anyway, and sort of just get credit for setting a target that says we'll reduce by 22% our carbon emissions by this year? They might have done that anyway. So is that setting a target, or is that just publicly declaring that your emissions are going to reduce? It's not really the same thing. And
definitely.
Yeah, so it's important to assess that.
Definitely. And then what I'd love to ask you about, Helen, as well, just from your perspective as an analyst, and you're really looking at all of those trends, do you have any headline insights of what that looks like, what we're seeing at the moment, and how that's affecting businesses?
Yeah, sure. So I think some of the key metrics that I would look at a company and assess them by would be, as I mentioned, do they have a carbon target? And then within that encompasses power, heat, and transport. Those are the big three categories where you might emit carbon, and then supply chain as well. Although that tends to be the more advanced companies, that's sort of a second thought after you've covered the main bases on carbon. And then also, depending on what industry you're in, different things can be material. So water extraction might be a really important environmental impact that your company can have, and also waste management. Do you create lots of waste? Do you recycle the waste that you do generate? And then looking at other kind of more social and governance factors. Do you have a system in place to make sure that these issues are captured appropriately in the way that the company is run? And also, are you looking after your employees? And also, what is your impact on society and the community? I think what's really telling is if you have there's always quite sort of entertaining examples in sustainability reports of some random family that the company, some enormous multi-billion-dollar company helped in the Northern Arctic, and you think, great, I'm really happy that this family is now thriving, but like, what are the bigger social impacts you've had on huge communities that around the world, rather than this kind of one very small case study? And often it takes up a whole page, and it's got a really nice photo of the family looking happy, but actually it sort of covers up a broader issue that there aren't any other examples to give. So yeah, I think yeah, these are some of the headline metrics. Although one very quick thing is the SASB materiality matrix is a really good reference if you want to see what a company in a certain sector should be reporting on. It maps it out really well, and it took 4 years to put together with a bunch of experts that they interviewed, and it's really thorough.
Thank you for sharing that. So I guess one of the things that we've talked about is that business case, and actually how the incentive behind it. And there are different incentives that different companies are talking about. And I think, Helen, that family in the Northern Arctic is an example of an incentive, I guess. But JP, from your perspective, your company helps corporates. You have an impact on renewable energy and bring it to the corporate grid. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, how do you actually build that business case to get companies to switch over? What is part of that, and what's the most persuasive thing for those businesses?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So again, different companies have different drivers. Most companies want to focus on price. So as long as the price of switching to renewable energy is not crazy high compared to their current energy contract, whatever, it's a benefit for them. But like, there's a big education piece in between, and we need to let companies know that if you really want to make the switch to 100% renewable energy or be net zero, there's different shades of green. Basically, you could have a contract directly with a wind and solar farm, which basically will help them build that wind and solar farm because they can get the finance necessary to build them. Or you can just go to your supplier and get a green tariff, which may contain offsets that you don't know where they come from, or they may have renewable energy certificates on top. Like, it's very important to understand exactly where your actual energy comes from. And something that we're trying to tackle now at Zeigo is, if you want to have a direct contract with a wind and solar farm called the power purchase agreement, and you want to basically commit to off-taking the energy from that specific wind farm and help the company that build it, etc. You need to have quite a lot of consumption. You need to commit to a contract for at least 7 years, if not more. So it's a big problem in the industry, because if you're a small company, you don't have the necessary volume to commit, or you don't have the sophistication of negotiating a very complex contract. So what we're trying to do is basically democratize the way that smaller companies can access renewable energy. But also something important is the fact that, it would help with the business case if there was some sort of incentive from the government. So there are some subsidies on the supply side. So basically, the government has helped. I think they've been removed broadly. There's just a few remaining. But the government has helped the supply side, i.e. the companies building the wind and solar farms, with some subsidies to help build more wind farms and solar farms. But the problem is that there can be billions of wind and solar farms about to be built. But if there's no demand, then obviously they're not going to happen. So if you are incentivized to buy an electric vehicle financially, why are you not incentivized to buy energy directly from wind and solar farms? Also, the other problem is that now, if you buy the energy directly from wind and solar farms, you still have to pay climate change levy, the tax, for the portion of that energy that is 100% super green, the greenest it can be, right? So why do you still have to pay the climate change levy tax? So there's a few things like that that the government needs to look into to promote and to incentivize the buyers rather than the sellers.
And is there movement for those things to change in the next few years? I mean, what's the current status on that?
In terms of financial incentives for the buyer, there's nothing really. We've been not really lobbying, but basically talking to base about the possibility, like, why are you not doing this? Also with the tax, I mean, there's no indication that might be removed in the future. But we are talking to them. We're in discussions with them, and we'll see how it goes.
So I guess what's the flip side then? I mean, those things are things that would be good for businesses and incentives if they existed, but they don't yet exist. I guess what would you say to either individuals within organizations or smaller organizations or those sustainability teams to make the effective business case for their board members to invest in this area? What would you say to those people?
So I think the best business case is actually the one you can see and you can understand. So basically, I would say get out there, test the market, see what projects are out there that fit your requirements, see how much they're going to cost, build a business case, see the impact that's going to have on CO2 emissions and sustainability, etc., and present that to the board and present that to the CTO, CFO, whatever, rather than going to the CFO, CTO and saying, let's be 100% renewable in 2030, and I need budget for that. And they'll be like, yeah, how much? What are you talking about? What kind of budget? It's like imagine your daughter coming. Imagine your daughter coming to you and saying, Dad, can I have some budget for when I get married in 5 years' time? I'm not sure how long the wedding's going to be or how expensive or who am I going to marry or whatever. It's like, yeah, sure, here you go. It's like, it's important to kind of present a strong business case. And this is something that companies don't really do very well because what we're talking before, you need to have the cost impact as well, and saying actually if we go 100% green, which we have to do anyway, is going to cost an extra 13% to the business, but we can mitigate this 13% by running a campaign and showing our clients how amazing we are, and this will bring X number of new clients because they do care about us doing the right thing and whatever. Like basically, and the big problem with that, just to finish off, is that for example, in the case for renewable energy, there needs to be at least 3 departments involved. So it needs to be the finance guy, the sustainability guy, which is normally the person that will drive the whole thing, and then the energy buying team. So basically, and sometimes the CEO will get involved in whatever because these are chunky contracts, but you have to coordinate different departments. You need to convince like a lot of stakeholders within the organization, and how big companies work. They just work very slowly, and they just look at the bottom line.
Yeah. There's something I would also add to that, which is that the business case, aside from cost, is well, JP touched on it, but attracting new customers, and also if you are a smaller company, if you supply larger companies, then it's actually a really good way of becoming a preferred supplier. And if you know that they have ambitious sustainability targets that they've shouted from the ramparts, you can say, look, we're really aligned to what you believe in. We want to go 100% renewable. Pick us and give us bigger contracts, and we'll work with you to do the right thing. So it can be a way of winning new business as well as saving costs. And then the third thing is it can actually attract talent, because the millennial workforce are famously very high moral, and care about doing the right thing, and they want to work for a company that they believe is doing that and having a bigger impact in society other than just providing a bog standard good and service. So it's a motivating factor for your workforce, and some people won't believe, some people won't care, but other people will actually choose to work for you because you are going in the right direction, and you might get a more motivated, happier, more interesting group of people to work with.
Yeah, and consumers are changing as well. Like definitely consumers are changing, and people are getting more and more involved in where stuff comes from and where it's made, and like the impact that is having in the environment. And is my chicken organic rather than from a one of those horrible chicken farms. So yeah, people are getting more and more focused on doing good, which is great.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we're seeing that more and more, aren't we? It's something you can't ignore anymore. It's very, very important. I would just love to encourage everyone listening. We are hearing some really great stuff from JP and Helen. If you have any questions, do add them into the Q&A box. There is still time for that as we continue to discuss this topic. So any questions at all, do add them in, and we'd love to answer them, or at least try to. Helen, coming back to one of the things you said at the beginning, you mentioned that there are two types of businesses. One, and the second was that business that is focused on the consumer and that doesn't have sustainability at the top of their priorities. How can that kind of business change when actually it's not their main focus and it's an add-on? And we've talked a lot about the business case and actually persuading those companies. What for someone who is part of that kind of business, what would your advice be to them?
Yeah, I think if I was operating from a sustainability team myself, for example, back in my old shoes in Accenture, I would say just tackle the things that are really aligned to what you already do, that you think could fit in well with what employees are looking for to make their day-to-day better, and also might actually help you make a better sale. So for example, as I touched on, winning new contracts, is this something that you can actually not only do properly, but also tell the story about you doing it properly, and on that basis form new relationships. But also going back to what fits in with how your employees work. So a nice example is at Accenture, people, it's a consulting firm, global reach, lots of clients in Europe, on the continent. You have to travel over there all the time. People hate flying. That early morning 5 a.m. wake up to get to the airport, to get to your meeting by 9 a.m. in Germany or Frankfurt or whatever. And a much more pleasant way to travel, frankly, is by train. And so giving people that option, it's more expensive, but giving people the option within their expense budget to say, look, you can spend 100 euros more, but you can get there by train, and you can stay overnight the night before if you want to. And I think giving people choice is a really nice way to not only make it a better place to work, and also probably make that employee more effective the day after when they turn up at that 9 a.m. meeting, not feeling like they need 4 cups of coffee just to get through it. But, you know, but also to empower the employees themselves to make good decisions, and to think, oh, actually, you know, my company really not only cares about me, but also looking at the environment differently, and integrating something that happens already, which is a lot of travel, into the business in a more appropriate way. And I think there's lots of really good examples of quick wins like that are actually, I mean, I really hate this phrase, but they are mutually beneficial to both the business and also to furthering a sustainability agenda.
Definitely. I think one thing that would be good to have a look at before we run out of time as well, is just kind of looking towards the future. And I'd love both of your opinions on this, but what are the main areas that we should watch? What is happening that is exciting at the moment, and that is an area that's developing in the sustainability side? Do you, JP, I know that obviously you founded a company yourself, so you're one of the people who is driving that change. So do you have a view on that?
I love the future. It's my favorite subject. When we colonize Mars, we should be more responsible. No, I'm joking. What we should be looking at now is essentially, so key metrics or key things that we can do right now is look at your energy, where it comes from, etc., the impact it's going to have. Electrification of vehicles is not happening fast enough, so there needs to be a cut down point for all vehicles to become electric. I mean, it's a trend that is growing very, very quickly, but it's not going fast enough. And then what's going to happen with all the vehicles that are not electric, that are on the road right now? Is there any plan to there is a possibility to turn them electric as well, and the government should be looking at this. Otherwise, it's not going to happen for a very, very long time, and that's one of the key aspects of like moving towards net zero. The other one is hydrogen. We should be looking at hydrogen more closely. Again, battery storage and hydrogen, the business case is not really there, but that those industries are very promising, and they need more incentives and government support. So those are the things that, you know, from my perspective, can advance the sustainability agenda for businesses and for you know, people in general right now.
And Helen, what are your thoughts on that question? What are you excited about?
I also love the future and trying to make it better. So there's 2 things that I think are really exciting trends that I hope will continue. The first is there's a lot more partnerships that are going on between businesses now to solve problems together. So joint investments, pooling of resources, putting good minds together. Just because you happen to employ the best graduate from Harvard doesn't mean that you can't share them with the company next door. And actually, you know, to JP's point about fleet electrification, if companies actually clubbed together and bought 100 vehicles rather than 50 each, the running costs of those would be significantly lower, because you could put them back at the same place, or all in the same place at the end of the day. You could have shared charging facilities. Maintenance costs would be lower because it would all be done in the same place, lower cost per vehicle in the end. And you get all these kind of benefits from economies of scale for either research and development or actually running of these joint facilities and joint projects. And then the second trend, which I think is really important and is going to drive a lot more change going forward, is the investor side of things and the pressure that we're seeing through the financial market. They're being a lot more vocal on in AGMs and saying, what are you doing on X? We need to have a shareholder vote on this because we don't think that you're doing enough. You're actually you're putting the company at financial risk because you're not addressing climate change. You haven't got a plan to address climate change, and frankly, you're an agriculture business, and you won't be able to grow half the food that you can't in the local area. So, what are you doing about that? And investors are getting really savvy, and they're starting to ask the right questions. And I think the more pressure they put on, I think blacklisting is not actually that effective, because what happens is, for example, we've seen in coal power plants in France, if the institutional investors walk away, and also if large utilities divest coal power plants, then the private equity comes in and they'll buy it and they'll run the plant into the ground, but they'll make a 12% profit because they can. So that's not necessarily the answer, but it's more, I think, giving the right incentives. And you're seeing more and more, for example, like interest loans based on sustainability performance. So if you perform higher than the agreed KPI, then you get a lower interest rate, and vice versa. And that's really exciting for companies, because then they can access new capital for cheaper costs that they wouldn't have had before. And that's a positive way that the financial market is working to get change happening. And I hope to see more of it.
Definitely. I think one last question before we wrap up, because you've shared so much interesting stuff, both of you. So thank you for that. I guess if for businesses across the UK, you've talked a lot about ways that they can change, the different types of businesses, and addressing those businesses that kind of are on different parts of that journey towards being more green. If they had to change one thing about the way they worked, what would you want it to be for it to have the biggest kind of collective impact for the corporate sector? JP, I'll come to you first.
That's a super good, really, really good question. And I would say look more into your supply chain and what they're doing. I think if everyone, even your supply chain looks at their supply chain, creates a network effect, and ensuring that you're, like, for example, you can't, as I said before, you can't force your supply chain to be supplied by 100% renewable energy directly from wind and solar farms, because they'll be a little bit crazy to expect from them. But at least understand where the product is coming from, where how they treat their staff, etc., would be, if everyone does that, it will create a network effect and actually become a more sustainable ecosystem of companies in that region. So also supporting them with stuff like, if you can support them with stuff like renewable energy, or sharing corporate social responsibility tips or whatever, it's definitely going to help them understand a little bit more about what they need to do, and it'll benefit other clients, etc.
And Helen, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my first thought was the same as JP's answer, so I totally agree. But to add an example to that, look at the largest corporate PPA that's just been signed in Taiwan by Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing. They're one of, I think, Apple's three biggest suppliers, and it just shows that, Apple are a real leader in this space. They have always talked about sourcing renewable energy and the importance of it, and also the importance to them of their supply chain doing the same thing. So it's no coincidence that this has happened. But then, leading on from that, a separate point I would say is earlier I mentioned that there was a materiality matrix that SASB had pulled together, and I think it's quite a smart thing to do as a company to sit down, if you haven't done any thinking about this at all, to really look at that and to see where you fit within that space, and to say, okay, these are the 3 things that as a company, these are our biggest impacts that we have on our community and on our environment. You know, if we tackle these 3 things, if we just do those 3 well, then we will be having the biggest impact. So, you know, if you have limited budget and limited resources, concentrate on those areas. And if you, yeah, for example, if you're a beverage company and you're using loads of water, drawing out loads of local water resources, don't focus on like how you're going to give money back into the local schools, and like start an education partnership with them, because frankly you should be concentrating on the water issue, and also probably packaging. If you're packaging loads of drinks, you know, where are you sourcing that packaging from? How are you trying to make sure that the waste at the other end is managed properly? So yeah, but I think depending on what business you are, focus on the things that matter to that area.
Yeah, well, thank you both so much for joining and for sharing all of those thoughts.